June 1943. Camp Hearn, Texas. As the first trainload of German prisoners arrived from North Africa, they encountered something that would fundamentally challenge their worldview. These were veterans of Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps, captured after the Axis defeat in Tunisia, where approximately 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered to Allied forces on May 13, 1943. What they witnessed in America over the next 3 years would demolish every assumption Nazi propaganda had taught them about American society. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey was established by Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson on November 3, 1944, pursuant to a directive from President Franklin D. Roosevelt, designed to assess the effects of Allied bombing on Germany. But while that survey documented physical destruction, a parallel transformation was occurring in the minds of 371,683 German prisoners held in camps across America. These men would witness firsthand the industrial capacity that made Allied victory inevitable. The journey to American camps began in the ports of North Africa. At processing centres in Oran and Casablanca, German prisoners experienced their first taste of American organisational efficiency. The US Army processed thousands daily with precision that exceeded Wehrmacht capabilities even at the height of German power. Medical examinations, identity documentation, and Geneva Convention briefings were conducted with systematic efficiency. But what struck the prisoners most forcefully was the food. After months of desert warfare on minimal rations, they were suddenly eating white bread, real coffee, and meat twice daily. This wasn't special treatment for propaganda purposes. It was standard American military fare. The vessels that carried them across the Atlantic were themselves demonstrations of American industrial power. Liberty ships, mass-produced at unprecedented rates, transported the prisoners to America. While the famous case of the SS Robert E. Peary being assembled in 4 days, 15.5 hours, was a carefully orchestrated publicity stunt with extensive prefabrication, the median production time of 39 to 42 days in 1943 to 1944 still represented remarkable efficiency compared to German shipbuilding capabilities that required months for similar vessels. During the 2-week Atlantic crossing, prisoners observed casual waste that revealed abundance. American sailors discarded half-eaten meals that exceeded German military rations. The ships themselves, equipped with radar and modern navigation equipment, represented technology Germany considered experimental being used as standard equipment on cargo vessels. Arrival at American ports. Upon arrival at American ports, primarily Norfolk, Boston, and New York, the prisoners confronted an industrial landscape that defied their expectations. Norfolk Naval Base alone sprawled across 4,300 acres with simultaneous construction and repair operations that dwarfed German naval facilities. The prisoners counted dozens of vessels in various stages of construction or repair, observing in a single-day operations that exceeded the capacity of major German ports. The rail journey to prison camps provided the most comprehensive destruction of Nazi propaganda about American weakness. Unlike the cattle cars used to transport German troops, the prisoners travelled in passenger coaches with seats, dining facilities, and even sleeping berths in some cases. Through the windows, they witnessed an electrified nation. Every small town blazed with electric lights. Rural areas that in Germany would have been in complete darkness glowed with illumination from farmhouses and barns. Factories operated on night shifts with parking lots full of workers' private automobiles, a sight impossible in Germany where car ownership remained a privilege of the elite. The camps themselves challenged every expectation. Built rapidly but substantially, facilities like Camp Hearn in Texas, Camp Shelby in Mississippi, and Fort Robinson in Nebraska provided conditions superior to what many prisoners had known as civilians. The United States operated over 500 camps across 46 states, every state except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont, with 175 main camps and over 325 branch facilities. These camps housed from 250 to 12,000 prisoners each, with construction typically completed in just 90 days. Wooden barracks featured electric lights, indoor plumbing and heating systems. The infrastructure, water treatment, electrical generation, sewage systems, represented engineering on a scale that exceeded many German municipalities. Camp hospitals exceeded most German civilian medical facilities, equipped with modern X-ray equipment, surgical facilities, and pharmaceutical supplies as standard provision. American medical personnel used penicillin freely, a drug German forces could barely obtain for critical cases. The systematic approach to prisoner health, regular checkups, dental care, treatment for chronic conditions, demonstrated resources Germany couldn't provide its own soldiers. The camp kitchens revealed American agricultural abundance. Refrigeration units, unknown in most German facilities, preserved fresh meat and vegetables. Electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges capable of feeding thousands operated continuously. Daily rations included fresh milk, eggs, meat and vegetables in quantities that exceeded what German civilians had seen since before the war. Food waste that regulations required, preparing 10% extra to ensure adequate portions, caused psychological distress among prisoners from a nation experiencing severe rationing. By autumn 1943, American labor shortages led to prisoner employment in agriculture and industry. This employment program, while economically necessary for America, provided German prisoners with unprecedented exposure to American industrial and agricultural methods. On farms across the Midwest, prisoners witnessed mechanization that revolutionized their understanding of agriculture. Single farms in Iowa or Nebraska encompassed more acreage than entire German villages. Tractors, combines, and other machinery allowed individual farmers to cultivate hundreds of acres. Hybrid seed corn, developed through American agricultural research, yielded double traditional varieties. Chemical fertilizers, which Germany desperately needed for explosives production, were abundant for agricultural use. Rural electrification had brought power to over 90% of American farms by 1943, compared to less than 20% in Germany. The contrast in agricultural productivity was staggering. American farms were achieving yields that German agriculture struggled to match, though the specific claim of 60 bushels of wheat per acre cannot be verified in available records. Contemporary accounts consistently describe American yields as substantially exceeding German production. Mechanization allowed one American farmer with machinery to accomplish what required dozens of German agricultural workers using traditional methods. The systematic approach to farming, soil testing, crop rotation, scientific breeding programs, transformed agriculture from traditional practice to industrial science. Prisoners assigned to food processing facilities witnessed automation that defied German industrial understanding. At canneries in California and New Jersey, production lines processed volumes that would have required hundreds of workers in Germany. Automated filling machines, electric conveyor systems, and quality control procedures operated with skeleton crews as American workers served in the military. Yet production exceeded peacetime levels through efficiency and mechanization. Near industrial centers, though prohibited from direct war production work, prisoners observed the periphery of American manufacturing might. The Detroit area alone contained more automotive production capacity than existed in all of Germany. Plants that had produced cars now manufactured tanks, aircraft engines, and military vehicles at rates German industry never approached. The Willow Run plant, visible to prisoners working nearby, achieved peak production of B-24 bombers at a rate of 1 every 63 minutes in April 1944. Though this exceptional rate was not sustained throughout the war, it demonstrated capabilities German aircraft manufacturers couldn't achieve even for simple fighter planes. The omnipresence of electricity particularly struck the prisoners. American factories, farms, and homes consumed electricity at rates that seemed impossible. A single aluminum plant in Tennessee used more electricity than entire German cities. The Tennessee Valley Authority and similar projects had harnessed rivers for power generation on a scale Germany never attempted. Hoover Dam alone generated more electricity than multiple German power plants combined. This electrical abundance enabled continuous industrial production, three-shift factory operations, and a civilian lifestyle that consumed resources Germany reserved for military purposes. The treatment of Italian prisoners after Italy's September 1943 surrender provided another psychological shock. Italian POWs who cooperated with American authorities received enhanced privileges, better quarters, paid work, even social interaction with American civilians. German prisoners watched their former allies integrating into American society while they remained confined. Yet even their confinement conditions exceeded what Germany provided its own forces. Christmas 1943 delivered perhaps the most profound psychological impact. American religious and civic organizations sent packages to German prisoners, enemies whose nation was still actively fighting America. Churches organized Christmas services in German. Local communities donated food for special meals. This treatment of enemies revealed not weakness, but supreme confidence. Only a nation certain of victory could afford such magnanimity toward defeated foes. Educational opportunities in the camps exceeded what many prisoners had experienced in Germany. By early 1944, approximately 25,000 prisoners completed formal courses ranging from English language to American history to vocational training. Major American universities provided correspondence courses and occasional lecturers. Camp libraries contained thousands of volumes, including German language books and periodicals. Prisoners could read multiple newspapers, experiencing press freedom unknown in Nazi Germany, where media served as state propaganda. The educational program's scope was remarkable. University professors delivered lectures on democracy and economics. This intellectual engagement complemented the visceral experience of witnessing American prosperity. Prisoners didn't just see American success, they studied the systems that produced it. Camp newspapers published by prisoners reflected this transformation. By 1945, prisoners published 135 different newspapers. Publications that began with defiant nationalism gradually shifted toward discussions of post-war reconstruction and democratic governance. American authorities permitted remarkable editorial freedom, allowing prisoners to explore political and economic concepts forbidden in Nazi Germany. This intellectual freedom, combined with material abundance, proved more persuasive than any propaganda program. One of the most significant publications was Der Ruf, The Call, published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, and distributed to camps nationwide. This newspaper, carefully edited by anti-Nazi prisoners selected through the re-education program, gradually introduced democratic concepts and critical thinking about Germany's future. The evolution of these publications from initial defiance to eventual acceptance of democratic principles provides documented evidence of the ideological transformation occurring among prisoners. D-Day's announcement on June 6, 1944, provided crushing confirmation of American power. The invasion force, thousands of ships, aircraft, and hundreds of thousands of troops, represented organizational capability beyond German comprehension. Newsreels shown to prisoners days after the invasion revealed the vast armada, artificial harbours, and supply systems that sustained the operation. Prisoners realized their homeland faced not just military defeat, but complete industrial overwhelming. Spring 1945 brought the war's end in Europe. As American forces liberated Nazi concentration camps, the footage was shown to German prisoners. Many initially refused to believe the images, claiming Allied propaganda. But testimony from American soldiers, international observers, and eventually letters from Germany confirmed the horrific reality. This moral revelation completed the psychological transformation. Not only had Germany lost militarily and industrially, but the entire Nazi project was exposed as criminal. The statistics of German POW experience in America reveal the program's scale and success. From 1943 to 1946, America held 371,683 German prisoners in camps across 46 states. Only 2,222 escape attempts occurred, a rate below 1%. While one prisoner, Georg Gärtner, escaped from Camp Deming, New Mexico on September 21, 1945, and remained at large for 40 years until voluntarily surrendering in 1985, the overall recapture rate exceeded 99%. No American civilians were harmed by escaped prisoners. The prisoners contributed significantly to the American war effort through their labour, though the exact figures remain disputed. While specific claims of 14 million man-days of agricultural work and $230 million in labour value cannot be verified through available records, documented evidence confirms that prisoners earned 80 cents per day, while businesses paid the government 45 cents per hour per labourer. In 1944 alone, the government received $22 million from prisoner wages and estimated savings of $80 million from using prisoners in military installations. The secret re-education program operated by American military intelligence carefully documented the psychological transformation occurring among prisoners. The Special Projects Division, established under the Provost Marshal General's Office, implemented a sophisticated program of ideological reorientation. However, historical assessments of its effectiveness remain mixed. While 25,000 prisoners completed democracy courses through the Rapid Post-VE Day program, multiple sources confirm that the program failed to change the views of the vast majority of prisoners during the war itself. The program's approach evolved over time, initially focusing on exposing prisoners to American media and educational materials. It later incorporated more structured coursework on democratic governance, free market economics, and constitutional law. Selected anti-Nazi prisoners were trained as instructors and discussion leaders, creating a peer-to-peer education model that proved more effective than direct American instruction. Medical treatment provided to prisoners demonstrated American resources and values simultaneously. German doctors working in camp hospitals learned techniques and used equipment unavailable in Germany. Mental health treatment, virtually unknown in the Wehrmacht, was provided to traumatized soldiers. Attempted suicides received counseling rather than punishment. This humanity toward enemies revealed strength through compassion rather than brutality. The medical facilities in camps like Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and Camp Carson, Colorado, included fully equipped hospitals with surgical suites, X-ray departments, and laboratories. German medical personnel worked alongside American staff, gaining experience with advanced treatments and procedures. The use of penicillin, still experimental and scarce in Germany, was routine in American POW camps. Prisoners received dental care, eyeglasses, and prosthetics, services many had never accessed as civilians in Germany. Religious life in the camps challenged Nazi anti-religious ideology. Chaplains conducted services in German. Local churches donated religious materials and occasionally performed for prisoners. This spiritual dimension of American life, suppressed in Nazi Germany, offered prisoners alternative frameworks for understanding human dignity and social organization. Catholic and Protestant services were held regularly, with some camps reporting attendance rates exceeding 60% of prisoners. Jewish refugees who had fled Nazi Germany sometimes served as translators and cultural intermediaries, their presence forcing prisoners to confront the human face of those their ideology had demonized. Transportation infrastructure observed during camp transfers and work details demonstrated integration on continental scale. Railway networks moved vast quantities efficiently. Highway systems connected the nation. Pipeline networks distributed petroleum products. This infrastructure, built through democratic governance rather than authoritarian command, supported both military effort and civilian prosperity. Prisoners working on railroad maintenance witnessed firsthand the sophistication of American logistics, automatic switching systems, centralized traffic control, and maintenance procedures that kept the vast network operating at peak efficiency. Housing conditions for American workers, glimpsed during labour details, exceeded what German professionals enjoyed. Workers owned homes with electricity, running water, and modern appliances. Their children attended free public schools. Medical care was available through employer insurance. This broad prosperity challenged Nazi propaganda about American capitalism exploiting workers. Consumer culture visible through camp experiences and work details revealed production for comfort rather than mere survival. Automobiles, radios, refrigerators, and other goods were mass-produced for ordinary citizens. This consumer abundance, achieved while fighting a global war, demonstrated productive capacity beyond German comprehension. Racial integration in military units and defense plants, while limited by 1940s standards, still exceeded Nazi racial ideology's rigid segregation. Prisoners observed African American soldiers and workers operating complex machinery and holding positions of responsibility. While American racial problems were evident and serious, the contrast with Nazi racial doctrine was stark. Some prisoners recorded their surprise at seeing African American sergeants commanding white troops or skilled black workers training white employees in factories, scenes impossible under Nazi racial laws. The velocity of American innovation observed through equipment updates and procedure changes impressed technically minded prisoners. New machines regularly replaced functional equipment. Production methods continuously improved. This constant advancement contrasted with German tendency to perfect existing systems rather than innovate. Quality control methods observed in American facilities revolutionized German industrial thinking. Statistical sampling, tolerance specifications, and systematic inspection caught defects before they became problems. German craftsmanship had relied on individual skill. American systematization achieved higher quality through process control. The role of women in American war production challenged German gender concepts. Women operated machinery, supervised production, and performed technical work. While Rosie the Riveter was partly propaganda, the reality of female industrial participation exceeded anything Germany attempted, despite desperate labour shortages. Prisoners observed women welding ship hulls, operating cranes, and managing production lines, roles that Nazi ideology deemed impossible for women to perform effectively. Credit systems observed in American society demonstrated financial sophistication. Farmers borrowed for equipment that increased productivity. Workers bought homes with mortgages. This productive use of credit, rather than mere consumption, enabled economic growth Germany's conservative financial system couldn't match. Prisoners learned about installment buying, consumer credit, and the role of banks in facilitating economic growth, concepts largely foreign to German economic thinking of the era. Research and development efforts glimpsed through university programs and industrial laboratories showed systematic innovation. American companies invested in future technologies while meeting current production demands. This forward-looking approach contrasted with German focus on immediate military needs. Prisoners with technical backgrounds were particularly impressed by American investment in basic research, understanding that long-term technological superiority required sustained support for fundamental science. Management techniques observed in American organizations emphasized delegation and initiative. Lower-level managers made decisions that in Germany required senior approval. This distributed decision-making increased efficiency and developed leadership throughout organizations. The concept of management by objective rather than detailed supervision was revolutionary to prisoners accustomed to rigid hierarchical control. Labor relations in American facilities demonstrated productivity through cooperation. While unions were restricted during wartime, collective bargaining's basic framework remained. Workers participated in productivity improvements, knowing they would share benefits. This stakeholder approach exceeded German authoritarian management's effectiveness. Prisoners observed suggestion boxes, productivity bonuses, and worker committees, mechanisms for employee participation unthinkable in Nazi Germany's command economy. Safety practices in American facilities prioritized worker protection. Guards on machinery, ventilation systems, and protective equipment were standard. This investment in worker safety, even for prisoner labor, demonstrated valuing human capital beyond mere exploitation. The contrast with German industrial practices, where worker safety was often sacrificed for production quotas, was stark. Standardization across American industry enabled mass production's efficiency. Screws, bolts, electrical components, and other parts were interchangeable between manufacturers. German industry's lack of standardization hindered production integration and maintenance efficiency. Supply chain management observed in American operations demonstrated logistical sophistication. Raw materials flowed continuously to production facilities. Finished goods moved efficiently to users. This orchestrated movement of materials, managed through democratic cooperation rather than authoritarian command, sustained unprecedented production levels. Professional development opportunities available to American workers through night schools and correspondence courses demonstrated commitment to human capital development. Workers improved skills while employed, advancing careers through education. This meritocratic advancement challenged German class-based limitations. Environmental abundance surrounding camps demonstrated natural resources America could exploit. Forests, minerals, agricultural land, and water resources existed in quantities Germany could never access. This resource base, combined with industrial capability, made American victory inevitable. Prisoners from resource-poor Germany were astounded by the casual exploitation of seemingly limitless natural wealth. Communication systems, including telephone networks and radio broadcasting, demonstrated information infrastructure. Americans communicated across vast distances routinely. This connectivity enabled coordination Germany's more limited systems couldn't achieve. Prisoners were amazed that ordinary Americans could make long-distance telephone calls, that radio brought instant news from around the world, and that mail service delivered letters across the continent in days. Public health measures observed in camps and communities showed systematic approach to population wellness. Vaccination programs, sanitation systems, and health education protected public health. Germany's ideologically driven health policies had subordinated wellness to racial doctrine. The American approach, focusing on practical disease prevention and health promotion regardless of ideology, achieved superior outcomes. Entertainment industries visible through films and radio demonstrated cultural production continuing during wartime. Hollywood produced morale-boosting entertainment, while factories produced weapons. This dual capacity for creation and destruction exceeded German capabilities. Prisoners watched American films that showed self-criticism and social problems. The Grapes of Wrath was particularly impactful, amazed that a nation at war would permit such frank discussion of its own failings. Voluntary organizations observed through prisoner interactions with religious and civic groups demonstrated civil society's strength. Americans organized themselves for mutual benefit without state compulsion. This associational life, destroyed in Nazi Germany, sustained democratic culture. The YMCA, Red Cross, church groups and civic clubs all contributed to prisoner welfare, demonstrating a vibrant civil society operating independently of government control. The production statistics that prisoners gradually learned painted a picture of overwhelming industrial superiority. The United States produced approximately 300,000 aircraft during the war, 86,000 tanks, 2.6 million trucks, and vast quantities of every military necessity while maintaining civilian consumption above pre-war levels. America launched more naval vessels in 1943 alone than Japan produced during the entire war. Shipyards turned out tonnage so fast that by autumn 1943, all Allied shipping sunk since 1939 had been replaced. These weren't propaganda figures. Prisoners could verify them through their own observations. Those who worked near ports counted ships. Those near aircraft plants watched bombers roll off assembly lines. Those in agricultural areas witnessed harvests that could feed nations. The evidence was inescapable and overwhelming. The individual transformations among prisoners were remarkable. Officers who had sworn personal oaths to Hitler began planning democratic reconstruction. Committed Nazis fell silent when confronted with evidence of American industrial capacity. Production statistics they initially dismissed as propaganda proved conservative when prisoners witnessed actual American output. Several notable examples illustrate these transformations, though claims about specific individuals must be carefully verified. Walter Hallstein, captured in June 1944 during the Battle of Cherbourg and held at Camp Como, Mississippi, organized a camp university where he taught law to fellow prisoners. He participated in the U.S. re-education program, attending administrative school at Fort Getty, Rhode Island. After the war, Hallstein became the first president of the Commission of the European Economic Community from 1958 to 1967, helping to lay the foundations for what would become the European Union. However, the claim about Hans Kroll being a POW in America is incorrect. Kroll served as a diplomat in Turkey and Spain during the war and was never imprisoned in America. He did become West German ambassador to the Soviet Union, not the United States, from 1958 to 1962, but his wartime experience was entirely different from that of the POWs. The Special Projects Division's re-education program remains one of the most complex and controversial aspects of the POW experience. Established in late 1943, under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Edward Davison, the program initially operated in complete secrecy. Its goal was ambitious: to transform Nazi soldiers into democratic citizens who could help rebuild Germany after the war. The program divided prisoners into three categories: anti-Nazis, about 10%, non-political prisoners, 75 to 80%, and committed Nazis, 10 to 15%. The strategy focused on the middle group, using anti-Nazi prisoners as instructors and isolating hardcore Nazis to prevent their influence. The program employed sophisticated psychological techniques, including exposure to American media and literature that demonstrated democratic values, structured courses on American history and government, discussion groups led by anti-Nazi prisoners, vocational training that emphasized civilian skills over military ones, gradual introduction of information about Nazi atrocities. The effectiveness of these efforts remains debated among historians. While 25,000 prisoners completed formal democracy courses, contemporary assessments suggest limited immediate impact. A 1946 report by the Provost Marshal General's Office acknowledged that the program failed to achieve a fundamental change in the thinking of the vast majority of prisoners. However, longer-term impacts may have been more significant, as many former prisoners later occupied positions in West German Reconstruction, where they implemented American-inspired methods. While the Marshall Plan was not announced until 1947, the groundwork for German-American cooperation was laid through the POW experience. Former prisoners who had witnessed American methods became advocates for adopting these techniques during Reconstruction. They understood that prosperity came through production rather than conquest, that democracy could generate wealth more effectively than authoritarianism, and that treating workers as stakeholders produced better results than coercion. The technical assistance program that accompanied the Marshall Plan built upon relationships and understanding developed during the POW years. Former prisoners who had experienced American industrial methods firsthand became interpreters and facilitators for American advisors working in Germany. They translated not just language, but cultural concepts, helping to bridge the gap between American expertise and German implementation. The agricultural transformation that former POWs advocated was particularly significant. German agriculture had remained largely traditional: small plots, animal power, limited mechanization. POWs who had worked on American farms returned advocating for land consolidation, mechanization, and scientific farming methods. They had witnessed how American farmers with machinery could cultivate hundreds of acres, how scientific breeding and fertilization doubled yields, and how rural electrification transformed farm productivity. These advocates faced significant resistance from traditional German farming communities. However, the food shortages of the immediate post-war period created openings for agricultural reform. Former POWs, who could explain American methods from personal experience, became valuable advisors in agricultural reconstruction programs. The transformation of German agriculture in the 1950s, from traditional to modern mechanized farming, owed much to knowledge gained in American captivity. The industrial methods that POWs observed found application in German reconstruction. Quality control procedures, production line organization, and worker safety practices observed in American factories were implemented in rebuilt German industries. The concept of continuous improvement, witnessed in American plants that constantly upgraded equipment and procedures, replaced the German tradition of perfecting existing systems. Former POWs who had observed American management techniques introduced concepts like management by objective, distributed decision-making, and worker participation in productivity improvements. These ideas, revolutionary in German industrial culture, gradually took hold during the Reconstruction period. The German economic miracle of the 1950s incorporated many American methods first observed by POWs. The psychological transformation went beyond mere observation of material abundance. Prisoners experienced a fundamental shift in worldview. They had been taught that democracy meant chaos, that racial mixing meant weakness, that capitalism meant exploitation. Instead, they witnessed order arising from freedom, strength from diversity, and prosperity from market economics. This cognitive dissonance created what psychologists would later term ideological collapse syndrome. The symptoms included withdrawal from political discussions, rejection of previously held beliefs, and eagerness to learn about alternative systems. Camp psychologists documented these changes, noting that even prisoners who maintained German patriotism abandoned Nazi ideology when confronted with contradictory evidence. The transformation was not universal or immediate. Many prisoners remained skeptical, attributing American prosperity to unique geographic advantages or temporary wartime conditions. Some maintained that German methods, properly applied, remained superior. However, even skeptics could not deny the evidence of their own eyes. America's productive capacity far exceeded anything Nazi Germany had achieved or could achieve. Beyond the formal re-education programs, informal cultural exchange played a crucial role in transformation. Prisoners who worked on farms often ate meals with American families. Those employed in factories worked alongside American civilians. These human connections challenged Nazi propaganda more effectively than any formal program. Many prisoners maintained correspondence with American families for decades after the war. These relationships, beginning with simple kindness shown to enemy prisoners, evolved into lasting friendships that helped bridge the divide between former enemies. The reunions of former POWs and their American hosts in subsequent decades testified to the profound human connections formed during captivity. The religious dimension of the POW experience deserves special attention. Nazi ideology had subordinated traditional Christian ethics to racial doctrine and state power. In American camps, prisoners encountered Christianity practiced without state control or ideological distortion. Local churches that ministered to prisoners demonstrated faith expressed through voluntary association and charitable action, rather than state compulsion. This religious revival among prisoners was significant. Chapel attendance in camps often exceeded that in German military units or civilian communities. Prisoners found in traditional Christian ethics an alternative to Nazi ideology, a framework for understanding their experience and planning for the future. The post-war Christian democratic movement in Germany drew support from many former POWs who had rediscovered religious faith in American camps. The educational programs in camps went beyond vocational training or political re-education. For many prisoners, especially those from working-class backgrounds with limited formal education, the camps provided unprecedented educational opportunities. They learned English, studied American literature, took correspondence courses from American universities, and engaged in intellectual discussions impossible under Nazi censorship. This intellectual liberation was particularly important for younger prisoners whose education had been shaped entirely by Nazi ideology. Exposure to alternative ideas, critical thinking, and open debate fundamentally changed their approach to knowledge and authority. Many former POWs pursued higher education after repatriation, using skills and interests developed in American camps. The prisoners' exposure to American capitalism challenged Nazi economic doctrine. They had been taught that capitalism meant exploitation, that workers suffered under corporate oppression, that economic democracy was impossible. Instead, they witnessed workers owning cars and homes, unions negotiating with management, and broad prosperity achieved through market economics. This economic education was particularly important for Germany's post-war development. Former POWs understood market mechanisms, consumer credit, and industrial relations from personal observation. They had seen how productive investment differed from mere accumulation, how credit could enable growth rather than just consumption, and how worker prosperity enhanced rather than threatened economic development. The POW experience created a generation of Germans with first-hand knowledge of American society. Unlike the negative stereotypes promoted by Nazi propaganda or the superficial impressions of tourists, these men had lived and worked in America for years. They understood American strengths and weaknesses, capabilities and limitations, from direct experience. This knowledge proved invaluable during the Cold War. Former POWs who understood American power and intentions could counter Soviet propaganda about American imperialism. They knew from experience that American strength came not from conquest, but from production, not from oppression, but from freedom. Their testimony helped anchor West Germany firmly in the Atlantic Alliance. While some specific statistics about the POW program cannot be verified, the documented figures remain impressive. 371,683 German POWs held in America at peak. 425,871 total Axis prisoners, including Italians and Japanese. 46 states hosted POW camps, all except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont. 175 main camps with over 325 branch camps. 2,222 escape attempts, less than 1% of prisoners. 25,000 prisoners completed formal democracy courses. 135 camp newspapers published. Construction of camps typically completed in 90 days. These figures represent one of the largest POW operations in history, executed while America simultaneously fought a global war on multiple fronts. The scale of the operation itself demonstrated American organizational capacity. The POW experience varied significantly by region. Prisoners in the agricultural Midwest witnessed mechanized farming and agricultural abundance. Those in the industrial Northeast observed manufacturing might and urban prosperity. Prisoners in the South encountered racial segregation that partially confirmed Nazi propaganda, while simultaneously seeing African Americans in positions unthinkable under Nazi racial laws. Those in the West experienced the vastness of American resources and the dynamism of frontier development. These regional variations provided a comprehensive picture of American society. Prisoners could not dismiss prosperity as limited to certain areas or industries. From Maine to California, from Michigan to Texas, they witnessed abundance and industrial capacity that exceeded their homeland's capabilities. Professional German military officers experienced particular cognitive dissonance. They had been trained to believe in German military superiority, in the power of will over material, in quality over quantity. In America, they discovered that quantity had a quality of its own, that material abundance enabled tactical flexibility, and that democratic armies could match authoritarian forces in discipline and effectiveness. These professional soldiers studied American military organization, logistics, and doctrine. They observed how civilian expertise was integrated into military planning, how industrial capacity translated into military power, and how democratic oversight enhanced rather than hindered military effectiveness. This knowledge influenced the development of the Bundeswehr, West Germany's post-war military, which adopted many American organizational concepts. The technological knowledge gained by POWs extended beyond specific techniques to encompass approaches to innovation itself. They observed how Americans constantly sought improvement, how new technologies were rapidly adopted, and how innovation was rewarded rather than suppressed. This innovation culture contrasted sharply with German emphasis on perfecting existing systems. Prisoners with technical backgrounds paid particular attention to American production methods, quality control systems, and maintenance procedures. They documented assembly line techniques, statistical quality control methods, and preventive maintenance schedules. This technical knowledge, brought back to Germany, influenced industrial reconstruction and helped German industry regain competitiveness in the 1950s. The transformation of German POWs had generational consequences. These men returned to Germany not just as individuals, but as fathers, teachers, and community leaders. They raised children with different values than those promoted by Nazi ideology. They taught skepticism of propaganda, appreciation for democracy, and respect for human dignity regardless of race or nationality. The children of former POWs grew up hearing stories of American abundance and kindness rather than Nazi propaganda about American weakness and decadence. This generational transmission of experience helped create the pro-American sentiment that characterized West Germany during the Cold War. The Americanization of German culture in the 1950s and 1960s built upon foundations laid by POW experiences. The reunions of former POWs provide powerful testimony to the transformation achieved through American captivity. The 1985 reunion in Austin, Texas, which brought together over 500 former prisoners, demonstrated the lasting impact of their experience. These men returned not as former enemies, but as friends, bringing their families to see where their transformation had begun. At these reunions, former POWs testified to the profound impact of their captivity. They spoke of arriving as Nazi soldiers and departing as democratic citizens. They credited American kindness with showing them alternatives to hatred and violence. They expressed gratitude for treatment that exceeded what their own government had provided, and for education that prepared them for peaceful reconstruction rather than continued conflict. Historians have debated the effectiveness and impact of the German POW experience in America. Some argue that the re-education program had limited immediate effect, that most prisoners remained focused on survival and return rather than ideological transformation. Others contend that the long-term impact was profound, creating a generation of Germans receptive to democratic values and American alliance. The evidence suggests both perspectives contain truth. The formal re-education program indeed had limited immediate impact on committed Nazis or apolitical prisoners focused on survival. However, the broader experience of American society, the exposure to industrial abundance and democratic prosperity, created lasting impressions that influenced post-war German development. Recent scholarship has emphasized the unintended consequences of the POW program. While American authorities focused on formal re-education, the most powerful influences came from informal observations and experiences. The transformation occurred not through propaganda but through exposure to reality, the reality of American productive capacity, democratic functionality, and human decency toward enemies. The German POW experience in America offers lessons for contemporary conflicts and reconstruction efforts. It demonstrates that ideological transformation occurs more effectively through example than exhortation, that treating enemies with dignity can convert them to allies, and that exposure to prosperity and freedom can undermine authoritarian ideology more effectively than military defeat alone. The programme's success came not from sophisticated psychological manipulation, but from simple exposure to American society functioning normally. The most powerful argument against Nazi ideology was not propaganda, but prosperity, not rhetoric, but reality. This lesson, that democratic society's greatest weapon is their own success, remains relevant for contemporary ideological conflicts. The German POW experience in America represents one of history's most successful examples of transformation through exposure to reality. Without coercion or traditional propaganda, American industrial might and democratic values converted defeated enemies into future allies. The prisoners arrived believing in German superiority and American weakness. They departed understanding that American industrial democracy represented a more advanced civilization that had defeated not just German armies, but the entire ideological foundation of Nazism. The 371,683 German prisoners who passed through American camps between 1943 and 1946 witnessed the arsenal of democracy at its absolute peak. They saw farmers producing food for the world, workers building the tools of victory, and citizens treating enemies with dignity. They learned that America's true weapon was not its bombs or tanks, but its inexhaustible capacity for creation. The transformation was neither universal nor immediate. Some prisoners remained skeptical, others clung to remnants of Nazi ideology, and many focused simply on survival and return. However, the cumulative impact was undeniable. A generation of Germans returned home with first-hand knowledge of American power and prosperity, of democratic functionality and market economics, of religious freedom and human dignity. These men became unwitting ambassadors of democracy, carrying back to their homeland seeds of transformation that would bloom into one of history's most successful reconstructions. They implemented American agricultural methods, industrial techniques, and management practices. They advocated for democracy, market economics, and Atlantic alliance. They raised children with values shaped by American experience rather than Nazi ideology. The economic miracle that transformed West Germany in the 1950s drew heavily on knowledge gained in American prison camps. Former POWs who had witnessed American methods became architects of German reconstruction. They knew that prosperity came from production rather than conquest, that democracy could generate wealth more effectively than authoritarianism, and that treating workers as stakeholders produced better results than coercion. The Atlantic alliance that anchored Western security during the Cold War built upon understanding developed in American prison camps. Former prisoners of war who had experienced American power and generosity became advocates for German-American partnership. They could testify from personal experience that American strength served defensive rather than aggressive purposes, that American prosperity benefited allies rather than exploiting them. The story of German POWs in America ultimately demonstrates the power of truth over propaganda, of reality over ideology, of example over exhortation. These men were converted not by clever arguments, but by overwhelming evidence. Every electric light, every automobile, every full meal argued against Nazi ideology more effectively than any propaganda could achieve. The German prisoners had expected to find a weak, divided nation on the verge of collapse. Instead, they discovered an industrial colossus of unlimited power and surprising humanity. They witnessed agricultural abundance that could feed nations, industrial capacity that could arm the world, and democratic prosperity that exceeded aristocratic privilege. They experienced kindness from enemies that their own government had never shown them. In their transformation lay the seeds of Europe's post-war redemption and the final defeat of the Nazi dream. They returned to Germany not as defeated enemies, but as witnesses to what free societies could achieve. Their children would grow up in a democratic Germany allied with the United States, a partnership built on transformation that began when veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps stepped off a train in Texas in June 1943 and discovered that everything they had believed was wrong. The legacy of the German POW experience in America extends beyond individual transformation or bilateral relations. It demonstrates that the most powerful weapon in democracy's arsenal is not military might, but the simple, overwhelming evidence of a free society's capacity to create abundance while maintaining human dignity. The German soldiers who witnessed American industrial might were not just stunned by it, they were fundamentally changed by it. Their story stands as testament to a profound truth, that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through destruction, but through demonstration, not through conquest, but through conversion, not through hatred, but through humanity. The German POWs were stunned by American industrial might, but ultimately they were transformed by it. And in that transformation lay the foundation for a better world, one built on the recognition that free peoples working together could achieve more than authoritarian powers could ever imagine. The German POW experience in America was not just a footnote to World War II, but a crucial chapter in the transformation of the 20th century. It proved that enemies could become allies, that warriors could become builders, and that witnesses to democracy's success could become its most effective advocates. In the end, that transformation, achieved not through force but through example, may have been America's greatest victory of all.